You speak longer and their suspicion gets shorter. You feel your jaw tighten as you keep talking. You add context, you add tone, you add proof that you meant nothing by it, but the room has already changed. What began as one clean sentence becomes visible strain. This is the trap. Once you start over-explaining, they stop weighing the facts and start weighing your need to be believed. The danger is not that you said too much. The danger is that you revealed the old contract under your speech. You showed them that peace matters to you more than position. You showed them that tension pulls obedience out of you. Jung understood this reflex long before modern people turned it into a personality style. When a person cannot tolerate being misseen, he starts serving the image that is attacking him. Then he is no longer defending truth. He is negotiating for permission to exist. That is why over-explanation feels honest while producing the opposite result. You think you are clarifying. They read appetite. You think you are correcting the record. They read fear. You think you are giving the missing piece. They read a person who can be kept talking, softened, and managed. The issue is not grammar. The issue is leverage. The sequence is visible in any ordinary conflict. Someone says your tone was off. You say that was not your intention. They stay still. You add what happened before that sentence. You explain what kind of person you really are. You remind them of your values. By the time you reach your fifth sentence, the original accusation barely matters. A new truth has been born in the room. You are the one working. They are the one receiving labor. They are no longer proving their claim. You are proving your harmlessness. That shift ruins more lives than open hostility ever will. Open hostility at least declares itself. Over-explanation creates a softer prison. You become the unpaid translator of every doubt aimed at you. You start pre-correcting misunderstandings before they form. You answer the look before it becomes a sentence. You begin to live as your own defense attorney. That is not communication. That is a low-grade confession habit. Most people do not notice the exact moment they enter it because it often starts in childhood, romance, or fragile workplaces where facts were never enough. Someone with more emotional weight than you demanded not only truth but emotional presentation. It was not enough to be right. You had to sound gentle, grateful, non-threatening, available. You had to make the other person comfortable with the truth you brought, so your body learned the real lesson. Accuracy does not keep you safe. Soothing does. That lesson survives long after the original room is gone. Now you are in a meeting, and a colleague lightly reframes your decision as careless. You could answer with one sentence. Instead, your chest goes hot. You hear the old risk behind the present one. If I am not fully understood, I could lose belonging. If I am not perfectly framed, I could lose safety. So you flood the space with explanation. You mention timelines, motives, intentions, pressures, prior approvals. The colleague does not even need to press harder. Your body is now doing their work for them. This is why calm manipulators love a person who explains too early. They do not need to dominate you loudly. They only need to hint that your image is unstable. The rest happens inside you. One raised eyebrow, one cool pause, one sentence like, "That is not how it came across." Now the whole interaction tilts. Instead of asking whether their reading is fair, you begin supplying material to make yourself legible on their terms. You enter their frame and call it resolution. The first real cost is not time. It is status. The person who explains first accepts the burden of restoration. That burden already contains an admission. It says the shared field is disturbed, and I am responsible for calming it. Even when you are innocent, the posture itself lowers you. The one who remains sparse appears more grounded, more convinced, more difficult to move. The one who keeps clarifying looks like he has something to recover. People trust settled posture more than detailed innocence. You can see this in small scenes that pass as normal. A friend says, "You disappeared on me." You know that is false. You are handling your own life for 3 days, but your stomach drops and you answer with a paragraph. You explain the workload, the sleep, the family issue, the late messages you forgot to answer. The friend does not become more respectful. The friend becomes more central. Your whole reply teaches them that a little guilt pressure opens your internal archive. The same thing happens in dating. Someone withdraws, becomes vague, then returns with a cool line about your energy changing. Your body rushes to repair the emotional weather. You explain what was happening in your head. You explain the stress you were under. You explain that you were trying not to overwhelm them. Listen to the deeper transaction. You are not exchanging truth. You are bidding for continuity. And any posture built on bidding quietly trains the other person to charge. The workplace version looks more respectable and is often more brutal. Your manager asks why a project slowed down even though the bottleneck was upstream. You already know the facts, but instead of placing the choke point where it belongs, you begin cushioning the answer. You explain that maybe you could have anticipated it better. You explain that everyone was under pressure. You explain that communication was mixed. That sounds mature. It is often self-erasure in formal clothing. You just converted a shared structural problem into a story about your emotional fairness. Once that pattern becomes your default, you stop speaking from jurisdiction and start speaking from apology. Jurisdiction names what is true and where responsibility sits. Apology language tries to keep relationship temperature stable while truth is being handled. These are not the same instrument. One protects reality, the other protects access. If you use the second one when the first is required, people feel the gap immediately. They may not say it out loud. They simply learn that your boundaries are made of interpretation instead of consequence. That is why brief speech often looks stronger than better speech. It is not because brevity is magical. It is because brevity refuses to subsidize another person's distortion with your energy. That is not accurate. That decision came from your change in scope. I am not accepting that version. These lines work because they keep the burden attached to the claim. They do not run after emotional permission. They do not perform innocence. They leave the weight where it belongs. Many people cannot do that at first because they mistake compression for aggression. They think if they are brief, they are being cold, rude, or unfair. But that fear exposes the deeper addiction. You have been trying to purchase moral innocence through excess transparency. You think the more of yourself you reveal, the safer you become. In reality, indiscriminate transparency is often just nakedness without authority. It gives the other person more surface to manage while giving you less ground to stand on. There is also an ego wound hidden inside over-explanation that most people do not want to touch. Part of you still believes that if you just say it well enough, no one will be able to misread you. That is fantasy. It sounds noble because it wears the language of clarity, but it is still control. You are trying to control another person's interpretation with enough effort, enough context, enough sincerity. You are trying to outwork ambiguity. Life does not reward that. Predatory people exploit it. Ordinary people simply get used to it. The room reads your relationship to tension before it reads your actual point. This is one of the hardest laws to accept because it feels unfair. But it is still true. If tension enters and your speech starts flooding, you communicate that pressure changes your shape. Once others learn that, they do not need to attack your argument directly. They only need to introduce enough doubt, enough chill, enough moral static, and your own nervous system begins dismantling your position from the inside. That is why your body matters here more than your wording. The training begins before the sentence. Your throat tightens, your breath shortens, Your face starts arranging itself into likability. You smile in places where the subject does not require smiling. You soften statements that need edges. You say maybe when the facts are already hard. By the time the words come out, the concession has already happened physically. Language is only the receipt. You can see the same pattern in family rooms where hierarchy is older than facts. An older relative says you are being sensitive, difficult, ungrateful. None of those words names an event. They are mood weapons, but because the charge lands on identity, you rush to narrate your motives. You explain that you were only trying to help. You explain that you did not mean disrespect. You explain the stress you have been carrying. The relative does not need to prove anything concrete because the accusation already did its job. It pulled you off the event and into self-definition. Now the discussion is no longer about what happened. It is about whether you can convince the room that you deserve fair interpretation. Digital life makes this worse because text invites endless correction. You reread your own message and start anticipating all possible bad faith readings. So you send a second text to soften the first, then a third to explain the second, then a final line to make sure they know your intention was good. That chain feels responsible in the moment. It often destroys your position. A single message can stand as a statement. A chain of clarifications starts looking like emotional pursuit. The screen teaches the same lesson as the room. The more you chase clean perception, the more unstable your own perception appears. Afterward, the pattern keeps charging interest inside you. You replay the interaction in the shower, in the car, before sleep. You build a better explanation for a room that has already spent your energy. This is where the habit reveals its full cost. Over-explanation is rarely confined to the original exchange. It colonizes the hours after it. You carry the other person's reading like unfinished paperwork. You keep trying to win a trial that no serious judge ever agreed to conduct. That is not just social weakness. It is theft of life. A cleaner standard helps. If the issue is factual, answer factually. If the issue is relational but made in good faith, answer proportionally. If the issue is vague, loaded, or strategically emotional, do not respond with biography. Biography is what people reach for when they have left the ground of reality and are trying to climb back through sympathy. What you need instead is containment. Name the claim, limit the frame, refuse expansion. A boundary is often just a sentence that declines to become a full performance. This is why some of the strongest people you know can look almost disappointingly plain in conflict. They do not deliver magnificent clarifications. They do not produce a museum of motives. They say the necessary sentence and leave empty air around it. That empty air is not weakness. It is pressure. It makes the other person expose whether there is substance under the accusation or only theater. Over-explainers fear that air because they think silence automatically condemns them. In reality, silence often reveals who is depending on your panic. If you want to break this pattern, you have to stop treating every misunderstanding like a referendum on your worth. Not every wrong reading deserves a rescue operation. Not every accusation deserves a full-file response. Not every disappointed face deserves immediate translation. A lot of your exhaustion comes from trying to prevent the discomfort of being briefly miscast. But adulthood requires the ability to survive temporary distortion without abandoning your own position to correct it. That means you need a different standard for when explanation is actually useful. Explanation is useful when the other person is operating in good faith, when the facts are still open, and when clarification changes the structure of the outcome. Explanation is useless when the main game is emotional leverage, image control, guilt extraction, or simple appetite for power. In those rooms, more detail does not create fairness. It creates inventory. Every extra sentence gives the other side more material to sort, twist, delay, and reinterpret. Think of the people who leave interactions with you feeling slightly taller after accusing you of something vague. They often do not win by being right. They win by making you enter the labor of self-translation. While you are busy proving tone, intent, and goodness, they are collecting position. They become the judge of whether your internal state qualifies for acceptance. That is an authority you should never have handed away. And this is where the pattern becomes dangerous in relationships with otherwise decent people. They may not be manipulative in a theatrical sense. They may simply be undertrained, emotionally lazy, or accustomed to others carrying the full burden of relational clarity. If you repeatedly explain yourself to people who could have asked cleaner questions but chose implication instead, you teach them that implication is enough. They do not have to become more precise because your anxiety will do the missing work. Over time, that creates a humiliating split inside you. Outwardly, you look communicative, open, mature. Inwardly, you become resentful because your openness is not being met with equal precision. You start feeling unseen, but the truth is harsher. You train them to interact with your self-doubt instead of your standards. You kept showing them the door to your interior and then wondering why they stopped knocking. The correction is not silence for the sake of style. The correction is disciplined refusal to overcontribute where the other person has not met the standard of reality. Sometimes the cleanest answer is one sentence. Sometimes it is a question that returns burden to the source. What exactly are you claiming? What fact are you using for that? Which part is inaccurate? These lines do something important. They move the interaction out of your interior and back into observable ground. They force shape. They stop emotional fog from functioning as authority. You may feel guilty the first few times you do this. Good. That guilt is often just the body mourning an old adaptation. It is the sensation of not immediately paying the familiar tax. You are used to buying safety with elaboration. When you stop, your system interprets it as danger because the old deal is being broken. That is where the break begins. The discomfort is not proof that you are wrong. It is proof that your old pattern has lost automatic access to your mouth. There is another reason this matters. The more you explain yourself, the more you train yourself to ask for witness instead of holding knowledge. A person with witness hunger needs other people to confirm that his motives are acceptable. A person with self-command can tolerate being briefly misunderstood while facts mature in public. The second posture is quieter and far more powerful. It does not panic when the room is late to reality. Jung's real usefulness here is not as a decorative philosopher. It is this warning: whatever you refuse to own inside yourself will seek validation from the outside. If you have not accepted that some people will project, accuse, reduce, or misread you no matter how carefully you speak, then every distortion will feel like an emergency. You will keep chasing innocence in public because you never built tolerance for being imperfectly perceived. That tolerance is not passivity, it is strength. It lets you choose when to clarify and when to let a weak reading collapse under its own lack of evidence. It lets you separate a true misunderstanding from a bid for control. It lets you answer the first with precision and starve the second with restraint. Without that separation, your communication stays expensive. You keep spending dignity to purchase moments of temporary emotional peace. The person who over-explains is often praised early in life because he appears thoughtful, self-aware, considerate. That praise hides the problem. Thoughtfulness is not the issue. The issue is compulsive self-positioning under pressure. The issue is a reflex that turns every hint of disapproval into a performance of innocence. Once you see that clearly, you stop admiring your own explanations just because they are articulate. Plenty of articulate speech is surrender with better punctuation. You do not need a new personality, you need a new threshold. The first accusation has to hit the structure before it hits your identity. The vague comment must either become precise or collapse. Silence has to do some of the sorting. The other person has to carry the embarrassment of making a weak claim without your rescue. That is not cruelty. That is adult allocation of burden. A strong life requires the ability to leave some things underexplained. Not because truth does not matter, but because truth loses force when it is dragged behind your need to be received well. The sequence is simple. State what is true, name what is yours, refuse what is not, then stop. The more stable your inner position becomes, the less you will confuse speech with safety. One day you notice the old urge rising and do nothing with it. Your body wants to pour out context. Your mouth stays closed for one beat longer. The other person now has to either become clearer or expose the emptiness of the accusation. That beat changes your whole social life. It separates communication from appeasement. It separates honesty from self-display. It separates innocence from the need to look innocent. Most people will never make that separation. They will keep talking until their own clarity is buried under effort. Then they will call the exhaustion maturity. It is not maturity, it is leakage. Every unnecessary explanation teaches others where your pressure points are and teaches you that your first duty in conflict is to make yourself emotionally acceptable. That is the exact duty you need to resign from. Your words should not arrive like an offering bowl. They should arrive like placement. Not swollen with fear, not sharpened into cruelty, just placed where reality already is. Then the room has to deal with the fact itself instead of the spectacle of your self-defense. Stay here if you prefer learning the mechanism before it gets renamed as personality.